Hi, Dr. C from Florida Pharmacy Regulatory Advisors here. You may have seen that we have a 1-hour Florida MPJE overview and study tips video on our channel, but I know everyone can't sit through a 1-hour video, so I'm going to try to put up some 5-minute quick study tip videos as well. The first few of these are going to be some of the same ones that are covered in that hour video, so if you've already seen that, this may be a little bit repetitive, but we're going to try to add some additional ones later that aren't in that 1-hour video. Don't forget, we do have our Florida MPJE Review Boot Camp coming up on June the 6th, 2020. That's going to be an in-depth, all-day Florida MPJE review course that utilizes our review guide, and you can sign up for that webinar at our website, which is floridapharmacylaw.com. So study tip number 1, and our study tip for today has to do with federal law versus state law. The general rule when you're looking at federal law versus state law is you have to follow the stricter rule. So if the state law is stricter than the federal law, that's the law that applies. And more importantly, that's going to be the correct answer on the MPJE. So our first study tip is really make sure you know that there is no distinction made on the MPJE between federal law and state law. They're not going to ask you under the federal law this is true or under the state law are true. They're just going to ask you to answer the question the way the law would be in Florida. So make sure you answer each question based on the requirements of Florida. That means if the Florida law is stricter, it applies. If the federal law is stricter, that applies. Fortunately, there's not a whole lot of those situations, but you have to be aware. I think it's important to know this because there are study aids out there that have a lot of practice questions, and I know students like to use practice questions, and I think it's a good idea. But sometimes those study aids have a lot of questions that are written only based on federal law. They can still be helpful, don't get me wrong, because there are questions on the MPJE that are based on federal law, and many times the state law is not any different. You see that in particular in areas like the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Most states don't have very different rules as far as how the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act applies to pharmacies. So some of the questions around things like adulteration and misbranding and what those definitions are under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, they're not going to be different in the state law. So those are good types of federal things you want to study. But you do have to be careful if you're looking at a review guide and one of the answers in there doesn't quite seem right under the state law that you're studying, such as Florida. So that happens sometimes because the review guide questions may only be based on federal law. Sometimes you'll even see a review guide question that starts out with the words under the Federal Controlled Substances Act or under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which of the following are true. That's okay. Those are good questions to study, but the question won't be asked like that on the MPJE because they can't ask it that way because, again, if the state law, Florida law is different or stricter, that's going to be the law there, and that's going to be the answer there. Let me give you an example. If you saw a question, and you would only see a question like this probably in a federal pharmacy law review study guide that said, under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, a verbal prescription for an anabolic steroid is limited to, is it a 7-day supply, a 10-day supply, a 30-day supply, or there is no supply limit? Well, the way they asked the question, the answer would be there is no supply limit, because the way I phrase that question is under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, what is the answer? And guess what? Under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, they don't make a day supply limit on verbal or for that part, even written controlled substance prescriptions for anabolic steroids, which happen to be Schedule III drugs. But because you know the Florida law well, you know that there's the Florida Controlled Substances Act has a specific provision that says verbal prescriptions for Schedule III drugs in Florida are limited to a 30-day supply. So the correct answer for Florida is 30 days. And that's the way that the question would have to be asked on the MPJE without the terminology under the federal law. It'd have to be asked, what is the day supply limit, or give you a scenario where that situation comes up, and you'd have to know the answer in Florida is 30 days. So make sure you don't panic if you see federal questions that don't seem to make sense, because the law could be different in Florida when you're going through study guides. And more importantly, when you're taking the actual exam, you got to go into that exam always thinking, answer the question based on Florida law. Answer the question based on Florida law. And that will take you a long way to passing the Florida MPJE. Don't forget, we do have our review guide, the Ultimate Florida MPJE Review Guide 2020 available. It includes lots of study tips like that one we just went over 100 study tips in there. We also have 50 assessment questions. We organize the laws and the rules together to make it easier to read and study by bringing topics together in one place. We also include some handy dandy charts in the back to kind of summarize some information. You can get the review guide at Amazon or also on our website at floridapharmacylaw.com. So please subscribe to our channel. We'll be adding some other additional 5-minute study tip videos. And best of luck to you in your preparation and studies for the Florida MPJE.